Brian, welcome back. Let's start in Tarrant County. Republicans lost 11 of the 11 seats there. What is this all about? You know, Tarrant County is a red county, I would say.
Well, actually, I think it's because Republicans voted in a May election. And you're talking about the school board races.
Sure.
And I think for the first time in a long time, Republican voters, Republican families came out and said, first of all, these aren't Republicans, these are libertarians. Their stated goal is to try to bring down public schools. And you know, families need good schools. It's the most important thing you can do for the long-term success of your community. And this time they voted, and they voted in big numbers.
Well, is this reflective of the schism, the division inside the GOP, and does it suggest anything about 2026?
Well, I just think that, you know, I like to call the libertarian wing of the party the carnival barkers. You know, they can only continue to throw out so much nonsense and voters get smart. So yeah, I do think this is going to have an impact on future elections in that Republican voters are smart, the parents are smart, they're listening to what these people are saying about schools, and they're realizing none of it's true. And what you found out Saturday, they got out and voted, and they voted them out.
But a lot of those Republican voters originally voted for the people who were thrown out this time, didn't they?
I'm sure a lot did, but again, once they got into office and saw sort of the extremist views that they were taking or positions they were taking, they said, enough is enough. You have to have good schools for your community to succeed. You have to have safe schools, and I think this was the election that Republican voters got out and voted in big numbers, and they voted them out.
The longtime mayor of Richardson, Texas, was defeated by a councilman. This is being billed as a Muslim Democratic councilman, former councilman, defeating a longtime Republican mayor. But you say this really wasn't about partisan politics.
Yeah. Well, first of all, he's not a Republican. He's a very independent leader in the community. He's been active in his community for 20 years, and you know, Richardson always had this image as being a town of innovation. You know, they were the telecom corridor.
Texas Instruments, right there.
Texas Instruments,
sure.
Up and down 75. And what you've seen in the last few years are voters and families and business people are getting sort of upset with them changing zoning for apartments, what they call unplanned apartments, but also the number of used car lots they're approving. So instead of looking for more innovation and promoting entrepreneurship, they're putting in what you would consider sort of low rent development in and around neighborhoods. And those voters vote, I mean, it was a landslide. You know, Amir voted, you know, he won by 15 points.
Yeah.
Over an entrenched mayor.
And this was more about Richardson going the wrong direction with car lots and with apartments, you think, than anything else?
Yeah, you see this in a lot of suburbs. Every so often, you know, they'll see a pattern where they're not happy and it takes them a while to get out and vote. But I think they had the second highest turnout in all of Dallas County. Richardson did.
Wow. School bonds, we talked about a lot here. Salina passed a $2.3 billion school bond. There were 89 of them across the state. Most of these passed. Does that send a message to lawmakers, especially after they approved school vouchers this session?
If lawmakers don't see that in the state of Texas that 80% of school bonds pass this time, which is almost a record rate, yeah. And if they're not paying attention to this and seeing that voters are telling them, you need to start making schools a priority again. You can only cut funding so much, and local taxpayers and voters, they're going to vote to make up the difference. It wasn't just Salina. You know, Melissa passed a $850 million bond. Mesquite passed a $600 million bond. These bonds passed, we're talking passed in landslide margins. I think this sends a very strong message to Austin. Take care of our schools.
And do you think Austin got that message, though, especially after passing school vouchers?
We'll find out after
in 2026.
in 2026. The problem is it's the primary elections when, as I said earlier, you hear most of the carnival barkers talking about things that are just not factual.
There's a bill in the legislature right now that you and I have talked about to move local elections from May to November. This has been talked about a lot of times in the past. The House is going to consider it next. The Senate has already passed this. But as someone who has run a number of local campaigns in May, you said something the other day that struck me, and that is, even though there is very low turnout for May, it is a very educated voter going to the polls.
Very much so. It's and depending on the community, it's very Republican. So this idea that they're going to move elections to November and they think that they're going to try to change, they're doing it because they want to change the outcome of bond referendums.
How so?
Well, in their mind is they'll make it a partisan issue, okay? And if you move anything to November, in an even year, it becomes a partisan issue.
Sure.
But we have seen our school bonds that we work on, they pass by the same big margins or even bigger in November, whether it's an odd or even year.
So at the end of the day, is this going to pass, do you think? Is this going to are local elections finally going to go to November?
I hope not. I don't want to see school bond referendums become partisan. I don't want to see races for mayor and city council become partisan. We see enough of that in Washington, right? I think we need to, I hope they keep them in May, but if they do, campaigns just get a lot more expensive.
And that's one of the things that the author Brian Hughes said. Hey, it's really expensive to run a May election when no one really votes. It's pretty expensive per vote. Doesn't it make sense fiscally to move it to November?
Well, think of it this way. If it's a November election, it's a much bigger electorate, right? So school districts and cities, when they do a bond, they have a responsibility to communicate to the public, explain what's in the bond, just give the facts.
Yeah.
Well, if they move it to November, they have to do much more of a communication effort, which gets very expensive. So at the end of the day, they're still spending more tax dollars. Hughes's bill will force them to spend more tax dollars.
Why are Republicans out to get these school bonds?
Libertarian Republicans, not what I would consider your mainstream businessy Republicans.
Yeah.
I think they're trying to placate the Empower Texans or Texan scorecards of the world, the Patriot Mobiles of the world, which are who contribute to their campaigns. You've heard the term Republicans, the libertarian wing will say, well, if you don't do what we want, we're going to primary you.
Yeah.
Well, they don't want to be primaried. But November elections, making them all partisan for city council, school board is a really bad idea.
Good insight, Brian. Thanks, man.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.